The storm had been crawling over the plain since dawn, dragging a curtain of sleet across the far horizon. By dusk, the wind had hardened into a cruel thing howling, scouring the earth bare. In the middle of that gray, a woman stumbled through the white breath of the prairie. Her shawl, once red, was now the color of the dust it carried. She walked as though the ground itself resisted her, each step sinking deeper, each gust taking more of her strength. The road was long behind her, but there had never been a road, only the promise of one. She fell once, twice, then stayed down. The snow clung to her lashes. When she lifted her head, she saw the faint glow of a lantern through the blur, wavering like a heartbeat. She pushed herself toward it, crawling now, her hands raw against the crusted snow. The lantern belonged to a man named Elias Rourke. His farm sat at the edge of nowhere, a spread of timber and fence, swallowed by winter. He had been closing the barn doors when he saw her silhouette through the storm, half human, half ghost. For a moment he thought the land was playing tricks on him again, the way it did when loneliness stretched too long. But then the figure moved, collapsing near the fence post. He reached her before the cold did its final work. She was small beneath the weight of her soaked clothing, her face pale and sharp as bone china. He carried her inside, the heat of the stove already dimming. When he laid her by the fire, she stirred, whispering something, perhaps a name, but the wind drowned it before he could hear. He did not ask questions that night. He only wrapped her in quilts and waited while her breathing steadied, slow and unsure. Outside, the storm screamed like a thing alive, but inside the cabin, only the ticking of the old clock kept time. Elias sat by the window, watching the snow erase his tracks from the yard. At dawn she woke. Her eyes were the color of ash, and they wandered over the room as if trying to place herself inside it. "You brought me here," she said finally, her voice a rasp. He nodded once. "Couldn't leave you to the storm." She looked toward the window, where frost laced the glass. "Where is this?" "South of Coldwater," he said, "few miles east of the river." She closed her eyes, as though the name carried weight. When she opened them again, there was something behind her gaze, a wariness shaped by years of running. He could see it. He had worn the same look once himself. She gave her name as Clara. Nothing more. No family, no direction, no reason for being there. Elias did not press her. The prairie taught him that silence was its own kind of truth. Days passed. The storm broke, leaving the land washed clean and hard. Clara stayed, helping with small chores, fetching water, mending a torn sleeve, feeding the mare that limped from an old injury. She moved like someone who had once belonged to finer places but had forgotten how to act like it. Her hands, though slender, carried a strength he had not expected. Elias found himself watching her when he should have been working. There was a stillness to her that unsettled him, as if she held some secret too heavy to speak. At night, when the wind crept through the chinks of the cabin, he would hear her murmuring in her sleep names, perhaps prayers, perhaps ghosts. Once, while chopping wood near the barn, he caught her staring toward the road. "You expecting someone?" he asked. Her shoulders stiffened. "No." A pause. "But someone might be expecting me." That was all she said, and he let the silence grow between them like frost on glass. Weeks turned into a strange rhythm of thaw and labor. Elias, who had lived alone since his wife's passing 2 winters before, began to feel something thawing in himself too, a reluctant warmth, unfamiliar and fragile. He saw it in the way Clara smiled once, barely, when the first geese crossed the gray sky. He felt it in the quiet comfort of shared meals, the sound of another voice in a house long empty. But there were moments when he would catch her watching the horizon with a look that wasn't peace, it was fear disguised as patience. He knew the signs of someone being hunted. Then, one evening, as the sun bled out behind the cottonwoods, Elias found a torn scrap of paper in the barn loft where Clara had been storing her things. On it, the faint ink of a wanted notice creased, smudged, but legible enough to read her name. He stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in his rough hands. The wind rose outside, carrying with it the scent of rain and something darker, the past coming home. He did not ask her about it that night. He folded the paper along its worn crease and slid it into his coat, and the weight of it followed him like a stone in his pocket. In the morning he found her already outside with the pail, breaking a skin of ice from the pump. Her breath made small ghosts in the chill, and her hands were red, chapped where the cold had bitten. She lifted the pail and met his eyes without flinching, as if she had decided that to turn away would be the greater danger. They worked side by side, the day quiet, the sky a pale lid closing upon them. He noticed how she set herself to each small task, as if labor were a kind of prayer, stacking kindling, currying the mare's winter coat, stitching the tear along the cuff of his shirt where barbed wire had had its say. When she sank the needle and drew it out again, her face folded for a heartbeat, and then smooth. He knew then that the paper in his pocket was not telling him the whole of her story. Near midday, he set the coat on the table. He did it without ceremony, the way a man might lay down a broken tool. He withdrew the folded scrap and spread it flat with the same hands that had once set his wife's hairbrush upon that wood, and he said her name as the notice printed it. Clara did not start. She studied the faded ink, the crude likeness, the promise beneath it. Her jaw tightened, but her voice, when it came, held steady like a rope under strain. She said she had wanted to tell him but could not find a road into it. He waited. The stove ticked, shrinking to coals. Outside, the wind ran a dry hand across the yard. She told it plain, and he did not look away. A town west, a freight office with loose ledgers and looser men, a bookkeeper who watched the sums tilt like a table on a crooked floor. When the owner's brother fled with the cash box and a clerk ended up on the riverbank with a hole where his heartbeat should have lived, the law found the simplest shape to fill the space. They took her likeness, wrote her name, and the paper did the walking for them afterward. She had left before dawn, she said, because staying would have been a kind of slow drowning. A woman alone can be made into many things. It is a simple work, requiring only accusation and a room full of men willing to nod. Elias listened. He heard what was spoken and what was not, the missing pieces like the gaps between fence slats where the wind threads its thin body. He asked her if she had done as the paper claimed. She shook her head once, not pleading, emotion clean as a bell tone fading. He realized then that he had been measuring her from the first day, not knowing that was what he was doing. The way she had fed the lame mare before feeding herself, the way she moved toward any sound of pain as if drawn by wire. He felt a small softening in his chest, a place that had been knotted since the day the ground closed over his wife. It frightened him, that ease. He had come to value hardness, to keep the world from taking more than it already had. That afternoon he took her to the cottonwoods by the north fence, where the ground rose and the wind lost some of its hunger. He showed her a wooden cross he had carved with a dull knife and a slow hand. He told her his wife's name and the way winter had taken her when the fever would not break, and how afterward the days stacked into a wall and he worked because work was the one thing that did not talk back. He spoke of his father, a man who had crossed oceans to stand in wheat up to his waist, saying a prayer learned in a tongue he never taught his son. He spoke of a dream that had seemed foolish in a place this dry. An orchard planted along the creek, small trees shouldered against the wind, a straight row for each year his wife had lived. He had stopped speaking that dream aloud. It had felt like a betrayal to want anything that was not her return. Clara touched the top rail of the fence, where the grain had been worn smooth by weather and beasts. She said nothing for a time. When she spoke, it was only to say that she could work. She could carry, mend, boil, and haul, and if he wished her gone, she would go. But she would not run from the truth any more. He saw then that she was not asking shelter. She was offering her hands and the hours of her body. Spring came by inches. Calves bawled small and stubborn songs. The river loosed its ice and crawled forward, brown and sullen. Clara learned the way of the place with a quickness that startled him. She took a fall from the bay gelding and rose with her teeth grit, mud on her cheek, laughing one short, unguarded laugh he felt in his throat for the rest of the day. She burned biscuits, then learned to watch the coals and count the breaths between turning. She found where the pasture grass greened first and cut the early blades for the lame mare. At dusk, she read from a small book she kept folded in cloth, the pages thin from handling. It was not scripture, though there were verses that sounded like it. Poems, she said once, and then did not say more. There were evenings when Elias forgot the paper in his coat entirely. They sat on the step after the day's heat bled off and traded small histories the way travelers trade water. He told her how his mother would hum while hanging clothes, a song without words. She told him how she had wanted to teach children their letters once, because names deserve to belong to their owners, and not to the mouths of men who could bend them. Trust grew as quietly as moss. Then the outside world tilted toward them. A rider appeared on the ridge near sundown. Just a single figure paused against a wheat-colored sky. Not close enough to name, but close enough to be counted where there was nothing else to count. The rider sat a while as if surveying a map only he could see, then turned and faded back the way he had come. Clara's eyes followed the empty line he left. Elias felt the old hardening return, the one he had thought he might be able to lay down. He went to the barn and checked the rifle he had not touched in months. When he came back, Clara was still looking at the ridge as if at some far shore. She did not shake. She only squared her shoulders, feet set as if to take the weight of what was coming. That night the wind changed. It came from the west, carrying the faint scent of rain and horse sweat. Elias could not sleep. He sat at the table, oil lamp burning low, and listened to the slow breath of the house, the ticking clock, the soft sigh of the chimney. Clara, turning once in her sleep, the rider's shadow lingered behind his eyes. He had lived long enough to know that some storms gave warning in the stillness before they broke. At dawn, he went out to the yard. The sky was raw, the color of pewter. Tracks cut through the damp earth beyond the fence, fresh, heavy, a shod horse. He crouched, brushed his thumb over the print. Whoever had ridden here had stopped for a time, watching, then left again toward the south road. He knew that road led to town. When Clara stepped out, she saw him kneeling there and said nothing. Her face was pale in the gray light. She looked at the tracks once, then at him. "You think it's for me," she said quietly. He didn't answer. By noon, a wagon came up the trail, drawn by 2 bays, and driven by a man in a dark coat. Behind him rode another, younger, wearing the badge of a county deputy. Elias stood at the gate, his rifle cradled but pointed low. The older man raised a hand in greeting, though his smile never reached his eyes. "Morning," he called. "Looking for someone goes by the name Clara Ellis. Heard she passed through these parts." Elias felt Clara's presence behind him, though she had not spoken or moved. He said, "You've been misinformed." The deputy's gaze slid toward the house. "We'll see. Got reason to believe she's tied up in theft and killing over in Mesa Junction." "She's tied up in mending fences and feeding livestock," Elias said. "You want to accuse her of murder? You best bring more than words." The older man dismounted, slow and deliberate, like a man accustomed to obedience. "You hiding her, farmer?" Elias stepped forward. "I'm saying she's under my roof, and you'll treat her with respect." The man studied him for a long moment, then spat into the mud. "We'll come back with paper from the judge," he said finally. "See how much respect stands then?" He climbed back onto his wagon, turned the team, and left the road heavy with ruts behind him. Clara did not speak until the sound of hooves was gone. When she did, her voice was flat, almost calm. "They'll return," Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That evening, he found her by the creek where the water ran thin over stones. She sat on a fallen log, coat drawn tight, watching the current. "You could leave," he said. "Ride east. I'll tell them you went south." She looked up at him. "And spend my life running? That's no living." Her fingers toyed with a small silver locket she wore beneath her collar. "There's a letter inside," she said. "My sister's. She wrote it before the fever took her. Said the world's mercy comes slow, but it comes if you stand still long enough to see it." He watched her face, the way grief and strength braided together there. "You think standing here will bring it?" "I think running won't," she said. "And I'd rather die telling the truth than keep hiding from it." He wanted to argue, but something in her voice stilled him, the same quiet certainty he had heard once in a preacher's sermon long ago, before faith had slipped from him like water through a sieve. That night, he cleaned the rifle again, though he prayed he would not use it. Clara baked bread, her hands moving steady, patient. The smell filled the cabin, a small defiance against the cold. When the lawmen came the next afternoon, the world had turned to dust and whined again. Elias saw the wagon crest the hill, sunlight glinting off metal. He felt no fear, only a steady purpose. Clara stood behind him, her hair unbound, face open. The deputy dismounted first. He held a folded paper, the seal broken. By order of Judge Brandt, we're to take custody of Clara Ellis for questioning. Elias took a step forward. She's no killer, he said. Not your say, the deputy replied. Clara placed a hand on Elias's arm. It's all right. She turned to the deputy. I'll go. The wind tugged at her coat as she walked to the wagon, and he saw in her gait the same quiet pride he had glimpsed the day she arrived half-starved, half alive, but unbroken. He followed her to the gate. I'll come after, he said. She gave him a faint smile. Then we'll both find out if Mercy's real. He watched them ride away until they vanished beyond the cottonwoods. The prairie lay open before him, endless and silent, and he felt something shift deep within a resolve carved from loss and love both. He went back to the house, took down his hat, and saddled his horse. There was dust on the horizon, and he meant to follow it. The trail to Mesa Junction was 3 days' ride if a man paced himself, but Elias rode hard, following the faint wheel ruts the wagon had left behind. Dust clung to his throat, and the sun burned the color out of the land. He stopped only to water his horse and sleep a few hours beneath the stars, his hat pulled low, the rifle near his hand. Each night he dreamed of Clara, her voice quiet against the crackle of the fire, her eyes when she spoke of Mercy. By the third morning the hills began to change. The land grew rockier, crueler. He could see the town ahead, Mesa Junction, a scatter of rooftops and one church steeple standing like a broken finger. As he rode down the main street, people turned to look. A stranger with dust in his beard and purpose in his eyes was worth looking at in a place that saw little new. He found the sheriff's office near the end of the street. The man behind the desk was the same older lawman from his farm, Harlan Pike. Pike's hat hung on a nail, his coat folded neat, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who enjoyed being feared. Well, Rourke, Pike said, didn't think you'd make the trip. She's in the cell out back, waiting for the judge to decide her worth. Elias kept his hands at his sides. I came to speak for her. Speak all you want, Pike said. Won't change what's on paper. Elias studied him a long moment, then said, Paper's been wrong before. Pike's mouth twisted, but he motioned toward the rear door. You got 5 minutes. Don't make me regret it. The cell was dim and smelled of iron and dust. Clara sat on a bench, her hands folded, the faintest light cutting through the barred window to touch her face. When she looked up, her eyes softened. You shouldn't have come, she said. I couldn't stay, he answered. They'll try to make you confess. I've told them the truth, she said. But truth doesn't travel fast in a place like this. It needs a horse it can't afford. He reached through the bars, and she took his hand. Her fingers were cold. If they don't believe you, he said quietly, I'll find a way to make them. She smiled, weary but certain. No, Elias, you'll find a way to live. That's what you owe yourself. The door behind him creaked open. Pike stepped in, holding a telegram. You might not need to worry, Rourke, he said. Word came down from Mesa Junction proper. Seems another fella confessed to that freight office killing his conscience, or his whiskey got the better of him. Looks like your traveler's clear. Elias turned to Clara, but she was already rising slowly, disbelief flickering across her face like a spark catching wind. He confessed? She whispered. Pike nodded. Seems guilt's got legs. We'll have you released by sundown. When he left, the silence between them filled the room like light. Elias felt something inside him break loose, something small but vital, like a seed splitting open after rain. That evening, she walked out of the jail wearing the same coat she had arrived in months before. The sun fell low, washing the town in copper light. The townsfolk watched as they passed, whispering, uncertain whether to feel shame or curiosity. Clara kept her head high. Elias followed close behind, the steadiness of his stride the only answer he could give the world. They camped that night a few miles from town. The prairie opened wide again, forgiving and endless. Clara sat near the fire, the wind lifting strands of her hair. I thought when it was over, she said softly, I'd feel free, but its strange freedom feels heavier than I remembered. Elias poked at the embers. It's because now you've got something to carry it with. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, then nodded once. Maybe that's what mercy really is, the chance to keep carrying what didn't kill you." He smiled faintly. "Then we've both been shown mercy." The following weeks were spent rebuilding what the winter had taken. Clara planted seeds along the creek where he'd once dreamed of an orchard. Elias built a fence around them, not to keep things out, but to give them a place to belong. When she worked, she hummed, low and tuneless, the sound of someone who had decided to stay. Summer came like a long exhale. The fields filled with color, and the house that had once held only silence now breathed with life. On Sundays they sat on the porch, the air sweet with sage and hay, the horizon burning gold. Sometimes, when dusk came down soft and the first stars opened, she would take the small locket from her neck and rest it in her palm. "She'd have liked it here," she'd whisper of her sister. Elias would take her hand then, not needing to speak. The quiet between them had changed, no longer empty, but alive, full of shared memory and something that could only be called peace. In the distance, thunder rolled, a promise of rain, not threat. The orchard bent under its own new green. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, and he closed his eyes, feeling the rhythm of her breath and the hum of the world settling into itself again. The prairie, once barren and cruel, now seemed to breathe with them, vast, enduring, eternal.